If there was one comic that could provide you with so much knowledge that it made you twice the comic creator that you are now, would you make it? Well, in this video, I'm going to show you a formula that not only shows you what that comic is, I'm going to show you how to make it so that you get the most value out of it as a comic creator. This formula is so effective that it'll improve your comics whether this is your first time or you've been at it for several years. There's only 3 parts, so let's get to the first one. Part 1, just make a 6-page comic. Seriously, that's it. Just make a comic from start to finish and make it 6 pages long. Now, I could end the video there, but you won't get the most out of making your 6-page comic if you don't know how to pay down your ignorance debt. Alex Hormozi says that everyone has to pay their ignorance debt in business, and comic creators are no different. Our ignorance debt manifests in the form of frustration and feelings of inadequacy, which isn't great for either our mental health or our performance as comic creators. Sometimes those feelings can freeze us to the point of not even being able to start our comics, let alone finish them. So we need to find a way to liberate ourselves from those weights that are dragging us down and start paying off our debt immediately. And by making our comics 6 pages long, it's really easy to start it because it's not a big commitment and the turnaround is really fast. Plus, you don't have to show this to anyone, so who cares what it looks like? But you don't often just get good at something by blindly doing it over and over again without some sort of long-term goal in mind. And that's why it's so important to pay attention to yourself while you're making your comic. Specifically, pay attention to the things that are annoying you the most. If you're one of my students, then I would ask you to write down all the things that you're finding frustrating while you're making your comic and grade them from 1 to 3. 1 being mildly annoying and 3 being you want to scream and set something on fire. What you're doing while making notes of these frustrations while you're making your comic is that you're figuring out a plan that is specific to your personal needs as a creator. There are so many different skills that go into making comics, and some people find things easier and other people find things more difficult. And by identifying where your pain points are, you can make a concerted effort to make those less painful for the next comic you make. You can pay down your personal ignorance debt. So let's give some examples. The first 6-page comic that I made was this. It's inspired by the game Phasmophobia, and one of the things that I found frustrating was that I felt that the characters weren't expressing themselves as well as they could have. I wasn't able to properly use their body language or facial expressions to help sell the tension of the story. And so I took that frustration in mind and I started to learn a more simplified style for my next comic called Enter the Alien. Because of the more simplified style, I had to focus more on the body language and facial expressions to help tell the story, and I feel that there's more movement and action in these drawings compared to the first one. I was starting to pay off my debt by changing my focus in the second comic. If you do the same, then you're informing your own learning, paying off your debt, and creating comics at the same time. You're having your cake and eating it too. Part 2, fast-tracking your learning. Other than writing down your frustrations, you should also write down all the questions that you come up with while you're making your comic. These can be anything from how do I make panels in Clip Studio Paint to what sort of speech bubble should I use for somebody shouting versus talking quietly, and anything in between. There are no dumb questions, only dumb answers. So write it down even if you think it's a bit silly. Some of these questions you may be able to answer yourself by just trial and error, and other questions you may need external help. I had an advantage while I was making my 6-page comics because I did a master's in comics at university, which meant that I could ask my tutors these questions, and they could point things out to me that I hadn't even considered. And if you have the opportunity to go to university, then go for it. But if that option isn't available to you because you can only afford ignorance debt and not real money debt, then there are alternatives out there. The first is YouTube. It's free and there are a lot of creators on the platform who are sharing their knowledge and experiences. The second is a course, like on Skillshare or an artist's website, like Proco or Mark Brunet's or Kesh's. And the third is one-to-one mentorship. Dan Berry, who's a former lecturer at my university, did this and I think he still does. And I do too over on my Patreon. So if you want a more bespoke approach that's more personal to your specific needs, then click the link in the description. There isn't one option that's better than the others, because it's all down to how you learn and what makes the most sense to you. If you feel that you can get the best answers for free on YouTube, then absolutely do that. If you need the structure that a course gives you, then try that. And if you need the accountability and specificity of mentorships, then go for that. The thing about ignorance debt is that it's unique to you. What you find difficult and annoying may come naturally to me and vice versa. So by focusing on the areas that you need to pay off your personal ignorance debt, you're ignoring all the stuff that doesn't matter and becoming a better comic creator much faster, because you're only focusing on stuff that's relevant to you. Part 3, applying these to your comics forever and ever and ever and ever. If you work in this way where you're taking notes of your frustrations and writing down your questions and getting answers to those questions on your smaller projects, then you're setting yourself up for success for your bigger projects. You may want to only do one 6-page comic, and that's fair enough, but personally I recommend you do at least 3 of them. That way you can start applying the knowledge that you're gaining immediately, which means faster results, more confidence, and a better plan for your bigger, more ambitious projects. I made 3 6-page comics before I made an 18-page comic, and now I'm making a 100+ page comic. If I hadn't made the 6-page comics or the 18-page comic, then I wouldn't be nearly as prepared to make the 100+ page comic that I'm working on now, and I would have found the whole thing a lot more frustrating. And when we become too frustrated with our work, then it goes from being a pleasure to work on to a burden. And it weighs us down to the point where we can't really support it mentally anymore, and so we just let it go. Most comics that get started don't get finished, and that's the #1 reason why. We get too excited and ahead of ourselves, and we take on more debt than we can manage by trying to make a 100, 200 page graphic novel or a 500 episode webcomic. So make that 6-page comic, write down all your pain points and address 1 or 2 of them for your next 6-page comic. Repeat this cycle at least 1 more time and then increase the page count to 12 or 18 pages. As you continue to do this process, you're paying off your debt really quickly, and you'll be in a much better position to do pretty much any comic that you want. Also, as a cheeky bonus, if you do 3 of these 6-page comics, then you can combine them into a single book. The fuck is my book? Like I did. And you can sell it at local conventions. Like I did. And you can make $5 million in profit. Like I didn't. But I did make a small profit, which is nice. If you don't know where to start with your 6-page comic, then don't worry, you're not alone. You could jump the queue and head over to my Patreon, or you could watch this video next where I give 5 secrets that I wish I had known when I was in your position.